All right, so we're going to talk about schema theory now. And schema is a mental representation. So it's a model for how we organize information in our brain. It doesn't actually exist like that. You can think of it that way, but it's a model that sort of describes how we organize information. So let's kind of, to demonstrate this, we'll start with a riddle. So this is an old riddle, and it doesn't necessarily work the same way because cultures change a little bit, but consider this. A father and his son are in a tragic car accident. Father dies instantly and the boys rush to the hospital. The doctor rushes into the operating room, pulls back the blanket and exclaims, "I can't operate on this boy because he's my son. So how can this be?" Well, in the past, we had different ideas about who could be a doctor and who that might be. But in this case, some of you might have jumped on the idea, well, it's his mother. And it'd be interesting to think that maybe some of you didn't. Maybe you were picturing the doctor from the beginning as being a male. And that's a schema. How we see the world, how we organize people in the world, those are schemas according to the theory. And so you can think of a schema as these sort of, as you think about brainstorming, they've done a brainstorming session, but it's a concept. So if you look here in the center here, and we have a concept of an egg, okay? So when we think of an egg, you picture an egg, you think of the yolk, the white, the shell. But a schema is also anything that we have built into that idea, the egg. And so as we think out, we might activate, so as the bird, we might think about finding it in a supermarket. We might think about Easter eggs. We might think about rotten eggs sometimes, and they're good to eat if you like eggs. They're nutritious. And we think about the delicate shell and hens. And as we keep going, we start all these things we sort of associate with eggs. And that's what a schema is. So a schema is like this file drawer, and we have this file for eggs, and we have all these things we keep associating and building with eggs. And we do that in order to sort of make it easier on our brain to retrieve information. And so we can encode it with one of these in one of these files, then it's easier to pull up information. Educators use this idea a lot when we talk about building background knowledge before you read something. And so in reading or in English, they might ask you, have you ever been to the place that the article's about? If you've known anybody that's done this? And then typically, if you can activate that background knowledge, it helps you to comprehend more. And we'll see that in some of these studies that we're going to be looking at. So schema is a way that we organize the world. And we put it in these little boxes so that we can better retrieve it and quicker and better understand it. So more specifically here, it's a grouping of related pieces of information, so that you can put that in your notes. We also call it a cognitive framework. So it's a structure within our thinking, way of organizing memory and simplifying information. And then again, you can kind of think of this like a computer, and you look at your files on the desktop there, and I name a file a certain thing so that I know what I expect to be in it. I named psychology file, psychology 1, because I'm looking at what we did during your year, and I put everything else in there, and I use that to kind of retrieve that information. Same thing you did as you start thinking about these studies, as we start thinking about dual processing model, and then what studies come up, what have you locked into your schema. And this is a way of putting things into long-term memory, long-term storage. And so if we can find ways to activate that and pull that out, then we're going to be able to do well on a test, for example. Okay. So here's a kind of a remake of a test we're going to, or of a study that we're going to do later. But just look at this, and I want you to rate your comprehensibility of this passage. So how easy is it to comprehend? 1 being hard, 7 being very easy. I get it. All right, so a newspaper is better than a magazine. A seashore is better than the street. At first, this is better than to run than to walk. You may have to try several times. It takes some skill, but it's easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. One successful complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Too many people doing the same thing can also cause problems. One needs lots of room. If there are no complications, it can be very peaceful. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you will not get a second chance. And so on your own, you just think about, did I understand? What's that passage about? Am I understanding? Would I remember that passage later if I asked you to remember it? Not knowing what it's about. And so you rate that. But if I told you that it's about flying a kite, now if you look at it in terms of flying a kite, you'll start to see, you can make it out of a newspaper. You can do it in the seashore where there's a sea breeze. You have to run to kind of get it going. All those things now start to click as to what we're talking about when I activate that schema of saying it's flying a kite. And so they did this in a study that you'll look at later. It's a different passage, but they did in Bransford and Johnson. So we'll look at that in a couple of lessons later. But that's one.